I sent out some questions. There's fewer questions this time because it's a topic I thought would take up some time. But if there's room at the end, I've got a question or two else that we could play with. But I thought if you had any, it's not on the, it's not on the plan, but if you had any questions, comments, pushback about the sermon Sundays, you don't often get a shot like that.
It was nice to have you up there, John.
Well, it was fun to be up there. I tell you what, though, I'm more and more aware when I stand up there that I'm preaching a space where there's some high cotton been going on for a good while.
Yeah.
We don't have one good preacher. We don't have two good preachers. We got three. And given the shape of this is my old codger mindset, okay? Because nothing is ever as good as it was, okay? But given the state of preaching in the conference for us, there are a lot of churches that would kill to have any one of them, I would think.
Thou shalt not covet is their thing.
Well, yeah, well, I remember the first time Brad preached that I heard, well, I think it's first time, and I saw the district superintendent in the congregation, and I was real sorry to see him there. There's some things you just soon keep to yourself, and
yeah,
that's it. No, anything about the sermon Sunday, questions, whatever. Nothing required. I just there was some different stuff in there, and I thought if somebody wanted to push back on it, that's fine.
What was it that now that you have given it?
Yeah.
What are you rethinking, or what do you wish that you had focused on more?
Jan, for me, and it's interesting, John and I have had this same conversation, and even though we come at it, John's academic, God, he's got more stuff in his head than, whatever. Okay, he just does. That's who John is. And I don't quite operate that way. If it's not in a country western song, I don't know it, okay. But we have both come to the conclusion in our advanced age of a need to simplify as opposed to
complicate.
Yeah, well,
amen.
And just try to bring it down to a manageable thing. And so in answer, Jan, I just worry about less than I used to worry about.
Right.
And and I don't need to defend what I used to worry about defending.
Right.
Okay. If you, this is no secret. Glenn Johnson and I got into some, blood and guts arguments, and I think both of us at this stage of our lives are going, okay, let's cut to the hard stuff and we'll worry about that, but some of the other stuff, if you don't want to believe that, that's fine. That's fine. I'm not, my opinion, and money will get you coffee at Starbucks. It's just going up every day. But that's where I am, Jan. I'm not, I've been more interested lately in history. The Monday Night Bunch is starting on a book next week after next, that I read a couple of years ago, I guess. And it's the Civil War is a theological crisis. And how the part that religion played in both sides. Everybody was absolutely sure that God was on their side.
Right.
And they had the scripture to prove it. Okay. And so that kind of reading back American history, whether it has to do with slavery or whether it has to do with Civil War or whatever, and to read it in terms of a theological context is kind of where my interest is now. But that's what's going on. And it'll be different if something else, another book comes along. Anything else? If not, we'll start at it. We've kind of gathered everybody in. One question, has anybody talked to Kathleen in the last day or two?
She's right there.
Oh, you're here. Oh, I see. It's a phone. That's all I can see. The phone's not a real good likeness. The phone's not a real good likeness, Kathleen. I got to tell you this. Yeah. How are you feeling, kid?
Well,
How are you?
Not great.
Well, I can hear that.
Yeah,
I can hear that.
Yeah, I'm just tired. I don't know how long I'll stay, but I wanted to hear a bit of it anyway.
Kathleen, I think that's the main complaint that I've ever heard or read for people who have had COVID is the exhaustion.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, just beat up.
Yeah.
Rode hard and put up with. Okay, well, let's do this. The questions that I picked out. Did God create evil? And then the second question was, how does one retain a belief in a loving, caring, and omnipotent God in a world that is so filled with evil and injustice? And two dogs that are fighting. And I have had friends who have lost their faith because they can't believe that there can be a God who permits such evil to continue to exist and the wicked to prosper. This is not a new question, by the way. As a matter of fact, we were talking earlier before some of you got here. A lot of times I have done Sunday school classes and said, you know, what do you want to talk about? What's your question? And 9 times out of 10, this question will come up. And there's good reason for that. Because it is at this point where our traditional views of God get questions raised rather severely. Okay? The question that was actually stated was, did God create evil? I would prefer to reword the question and to say, does God allow evil? That's different. Now, of course, the argument could be made, oh, well, if evil's there, then somebody created it. Okay, I mean, I understand that argument. And I'm going to close the door and while my dog. If you want to, okay, is this, you're back. Is this an issue? I mean, is this an issue for y'all? I mean, does this?
They're not making any noise.
No, I'm not talking about the dog. I mean, the question.
Oh.
No.
I couldn't tell.
Yeah. No.
How do you mean it's it an issue? It's, I mean, I'm interested in it. I don't have a problem with it. God lets it exist.
But we
Well,
have a problem with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. What, Davis, you?
Well, I've discovered as through all of these sessions that I agree with most what everything said, and some, particularly the John W. stuff, gets really heady.
Yeah.
But you know, these are conversations I've had with other people too, and sometimes I wish I had better words for what I'm trying to tell people, if that makes sense. Sometimes it's hard to express to people asking these questions in a way. to help them understand better.
Okay, at the risk of launching into a sermon, okay, and I'm not going to because I don't have 3 points. But if, and stop me or question or whatever, you know the rules. Okay, let me just, okay. The rational mind, which theoretically we operate out of, wants to make sense of things. And the sense we want to make out of things is cause and effect. If I'm good, then I should get good. And that works out fine as long as good works out. The problem comes when you think you've done good or you've given it a pretty decent effort, and then the world goes to hell. Okay, so then the question becomes, wait a minute. And the wonderful phrase fair comes up, which if you raise any children at all, you're very familiar with fair. And it's never said, it's not fair. And it's never said without a nasal deal to it, fair, so that it goes right to your sinus cavities and your spinal column, interacting with your entire nervous system. Okay, we want fair. Oddly enough, fair only comes up when you think you're getting taken. If things are going good, we never say, for example, okay, for years, the Methodist Church published the closest thing to just a pure destructive document that I can think of, and we called it the declension sheet.
Yes.
Okay, the declension sheet, you'll love this, listed the charges in the conference in order of their salary. Okay? And out of transparency, we published that thing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, the interesting thing that happened when the declension sheet came out every year, you would look for, meaning me, I would look for where my name was on the sheet. Okay. And then I would look and see who was ahead of me.
Mm-hmm.
And I would often say, why the devil is he or she there and me here? What I never did, wait a minute, what I never did was look down the sheet and say, wait a minute, why am I here and they're there? Because fair only comes up when you think you're getting taken. Okay, now that's the initial premise. Okay, it's not unusual. We all operate out of that kind of various forms of stupidity. Okay.
Kathleen was going to say something.
Oh, go, Kathleen.
I was just going to say, I was pretty sure there was no she ahead of you, John.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Let's just say I was much more interested in it, Kathleen, when I was in Mertzen, Texas.
Robbie and
There
Tom
was
have their hand up too.
There was a time when Jack Heacock and Jack Cooper, who was
Oh,
at
yeah.
Alamo Heights,
Yep.
big rivalry.
Battle for the top. Tom, did you have something?
John, look at the, whatever it is, is that the chat?
Chat.
You'll see my two responses.
Oh,
One, on your first question,
Yeah.
the way I
Yeah.
do not put any intellectual energy into it is I just say, well, God's not a puppeteer.
so there's a
And so there's evil. And then secondly, when you were saying, what about this and what about that? And it's not fair. I just gave you the divorce lawyer response. We say, we don't use the F word in family law. and the client got it both ways.
Yeah. Well, let's just a little background. The Old Testament basically has one message. It was summarized when my first week in Hebrew class by Dr. Dudley Steinspring, who said that the summary of the prophets of the Old Testament can basically come down to this. God will get you if you don't watch out. You didn't watch out, now God's going to get you. Okay, the premise was you're good, God's good. Okay, and that held up, except for two places. The book of Ecclesiastes, and guess what the next one is? Come on. Huh?
Job.
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 Okay. In both cases, they're saying, now wait a minute, that system may not work like you think it will. Okay. Now, three things. Let's just look at Job for a second. Some of you have heard this. Try not to move your lips while I'm talking. Three things you can say about Job. God is omnipotent. God is just. Job is a good man. You can only have any two of those be true, but not all three. Okay? That's the problem. And that's where the struggle comes in. And we try not to think about it. Kushner, Rabbi Kushner, who years ago wrote When Bad Things Happen to Good People. Okay, he's written a follow-up, and it's the Book of Job, When Bad Things Happen to a Good Person. By the way, worth reading, good stuff. And he says, we want to know why these people were victims and not some other people, and why at this time and not some other time. We crave reasons, and reasons are never that hard to find if one looks hard enough, especially if the quest involves people that we don't know and have never met. I know why those people are suffering, and I'll come up with a reason why. Now, when it happens to me, whoa, wait just a minute, okay? Now, one of the best treatments that for me, the best treatment of this comes from Leslie Weatherhead. If you have not read The Will of God, you ought to. In fact, it's something that ought to be read every year as a part of your devotional practice. Weatherhead was a Methodist preacher in England during the bombing of Britain. And his people were coming to him saying, wait a minute, we're good people. Why is this happening to us? How is this the will of God? He comes up with three responses. He says that there are three wills of God: the intentional will, the circumstantial will, and the ultimate will of God. He defines them this way, as I recall. The first is the intentional will, which is what it is that God intends to happen. The second one is the circumstantial will that arises because apparently God made one error in creation. He doesn't say this, this is my being snide. And that is, he gave us choice. And once you give choice, then in a way, bets are off. Okay. So he says then, God's circumstantial will is, given the situations that have been created by what he calls sin, folly, and ignorance, given the situation that has been created by those three things, or any of those three things, what is God's will in the midst of these circumstances? Even though it may not have been God's intention at the beginning. We clear so far? Okay. Then he says, there is God's ultimate will. And that is that finally, all of this will work out and all things will come together. Ultimately. Which does not give you a great deal of comfort in the middle of it right now. Okay. Now, to apply those three to Jesus, he said, Jesus came into the world and God intended that people listen. They did not. And when they did not, in the midst of the circumstances, God's will was, and Jesus followed it, was that he would be crucified. It was not his intention from the beginning. It was the result of the circumstances. Now, that's all what I remember thinking this years and years ago. If everything is predestined, and if God is totally in charge, why do I have to confess any sin? Because I didn't have a choice in the first place. It's very much like my mother was saying, do you want apple pie or lemon? And I said, well, I'd like apple. She said, good, because we didn't have any lemon. In other words, I had the illusion of choice, but the choice was already made. Okay. If that's the case, then you have to say, given the three categories we talked about earlier, that God may not be just. Because if it's all determined, then why am I responsible? You see that? That's the issue that has always just kind of messed my mind.
John,
Yes, ma'am.
how does Presbyterian theology work with that? Because
Double predestination or whatever.
yeah,
I don't think it works real well with it.
no, but I mean, how do they explain it?
Well, I don't know, to be quite honest with you. I have dealt with Baptists, I have dealt with Methodists, I have dealt with Episcopalians. I married a Presbyterian, but she thought it was predestined and leaves us alone. No, I don't know how they deal with it, Penny. But for me, it clouds the issue. It makes God ultimately responsible for my behavior, or it makes me not responsible for my behavior.
Yeah,
And again, if everything is planned out ahead of time, if everything, why do we have a prayer of confession? Why is confession even necessary? We never had a choice in the first place. But you see, I think we do. And I think it matters that we have a choice, because what does it mean? What does it matter if I say yes to God if I can't say no? See my point? I have to have the freedom to choose God. If that choice is already made, then it doesn't matter. I kind of get that way about the crucifixion sometimes. If Jesus was born to be crucified, I mean, day one. Don't talk about obedience. He never had a choice. What does faithful mean if you don't have a choice? That's the issue and I've got no, if I did, I'd write a book, but I don't. I mean, that's the stuff that bugs me when I'm
In
trying
the
to think.
first year of law school, they just ask questions and they don't give you any answers.
Yeah.
And that's what you're doing.
Yeah, I know. And well, but Tom, I think questions are real important. It's what I was talking about a bit Sunday. I think the church has hurt itself severely when it said we just cannot entertain any questions. And I think we don't entertain questions because we're afraid of losing what feeble bit of authority we have. That's one possibility. The other possibility is that we know deep down we're real not sure ourselves. And when I'm really not sure, I don't want to talk about it. I said, if I'm positive, I'll let you believe what you want to. If you threaten me, I'll go for your jugular. That's where the what is it? Games people play, Eric Byrne, what, years and years ago, 1970s. Yeah, anyway, one of his chapters was uproar. And somebody raises an issue and you immediately jack up the emotion because you don't want to talk about it. Well, I've got some questions about religion. Oh, you don't believe in Jesus, do you? See? Well, what does that do? Well, yeah, it cuts off all conversation. Or you go ask the preacher about something, he said, well, you think like that, you're going straight to hell. Well, that kind of helps the conversation along. So I think questions are real important, huh? They really are.
Yeah. But
and I think we live in front of them. I think we live answering questions. Penny, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that whole thing of some of the classes I've took on rabbinical, the way they did, the rabbis would get together and somebody would pose a problem and somebody would ask another question and and then somebody would say this, and they would not really ever get to an answer particularly. It was just this always questioning and always bringing something else in.
Well, and what is it, or to really ask, one of my pet peeves about the church is that we use all these terms and you've heard me say this before, we use all these terms and none of us really know for sure what each of us mean when we say it, but none of us will ask the question, well, what do you mean when you say that? Because when I talk about grace, I may mean something different than you talk about it. So we try to have these conversations and we're like ships passing in the night because we're not talking about the same thing.
I saw Brene Brown interviewed this morning on the news. She's got a new series that's going to be on HBO, and her latest book, I think she had something like 30, forget how she defined them, that she had, or 80 or something. She says, we try to put too many things in the same pot, like happiness or unhappy. And she says the gradations are there and the gradations make the difference.
Yeah.
Because the words we use form our emotions, and we are emotional people that every now and then we do something rational. We try to think of ourselves as very rational, and if we go off and do something emotional, oh, that's really bad. But she says we're really emotional. And
then we use rational to back up our emotions.
Right.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Yeah. Other thoughts? Or push us in another direction on this? I thought I had a while ago. one of the problems, and Penny, you kind of talked about it, I think, hinted at it. And you all heard the sermon, you know, that the Greeks have at least 3 different words for love, and I think Hebrew has about 5, and they all mean different things. Shades. Yes, come here. They all have shades of meaning, but we put them all together. One of the great occasions of that is when Jesus is talking to Peter, and he says, Peter, do you love, in the English translation, Peter, do you love me? Well, there are 3 Greek words, and what he's saying, you know, do you love me? And Peter answers saying, well, you know, I'm your friend. He uses a different word. And then Jesus comes back and said, no, do you love me? Agape. Do you love me? And again, Peter getting a little torqued here at this point, says, I told you I'm your friend. And at that point, Jesus says, are you even my friend? But we miss all that. Why? Because as Penny said, we use one word and we miss the shades. And that's part of our problem theologically, is that our words have shades of meaning. And, you know, Tom may have, when we're talking about a word, when we say it, he thinks one thing, I think another, but we both think the same thing, which makes the conversation much more troublesome. Let's see. Peter Eanes, in his book, The Sin of Certainty, Why God Desires Our Trust More Than Our Correct Beliefs, another one you might want to look at. He says, once you are left with one God who is also all-knowing and all-loving, why do senseless and horrible things happen is a lot harder to answer. That's the monotheist dilemma. A schizophrenic God who is all loving and caring one moment and then distant and uncaring the next. Then God becomes inconsistent because of the categories that we have. And why do we have those? Is because we're trying to describe a reality that is bigger than we can even begin to understand. Was it Augustine, somebody, theologians and crowd, who said, if you understand God, it's not God? Well, we try to understand and put it in categories that we can handle, so we can make sense out of it, because we're rational people, theoretically. Cable television to the contrary, but anyway, that's something else. Anything else on that? If not, I'll push us into a couple other questions. Okay. This one was on the list and I didn't put it down. How can I love my enemy when my enemy is willfully ignorant, even evil, or at least behaving in an evil way? I mean, none of that going on, right? I mean, we're all getting along with our relatives just fine. We all agree politically. We have no problem in the church. I mean, we're all good Christian people who can just love Jesus and get along and no problem whatsoever.
What world are you living in?
Wrong.
Yeah, not this one. How do we deal with that? Somebody give me an answer? I mean, how do you deal with it? All of us have got somebody that makes us crazy. If not, I really want to know what world you're living in. How do you deal with it?
If we only had one somebody who made us crazy.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah. Tom, you started?
If we don't have it, it's probably us.
Well, that's, If 1 out of 3 people in the world is a weirdo, and if your 2 friends on either side of you are not weirdos, then you must be the one. Tom, you started.
Well, for some people, there's the principle of avoidance. And so we don't deal with it.
Yeah,
And yet, in the practice of law for 50 years, I would tell young lawyers, avoidance is not your friend.
yeah.
You know, deal with it, meet it face on, and move forward. But and so that's the two sides of the coin that I think of when you say that.
Yeah,
I think you got to just keep trying. I mean, really.
Yeah.
And just commit to incremental steps, but you just have to keep trying.
I think you're right, Kurt, and I think there's a prior awareness. You have to believe deep down that they're worth it.
Oh yeah.
See,
I agree with that.
okay, now, and the problem that we have gotten into, at least in my perception of the problem, is that we don't just dislike people, we despise them.
Yeah.
Because we're mad as hell. And they're mad as hell. And when everybody's mad as hell, it's really hard to get anything done. It really is. And so I think you're absolutely right. But the only reason that we will persevere is because we believe they're worth the trouble. And I think there's a prior theological consideration before that. And that is, we believe they're worth the trouble because they are a child of God, just as we are a child of God.
Absolutely.
See?
Yeah. Oh, sure.
See, but that's and that's the starting point.
Right.
And that's how you can stay at it. You know, if I get up in the morning and say, well, I'm just going to talk to so-and-so today and I'm going to be nice to them and whatever, I'll get far enough into the conversation until they, call me a name about the fourth or fifth sentence. And then that conversation pretty much goes downhill because I have not invested myself in the premise that they are a child of God, as am I, and that they are worth the effort. And so I may have to exert the energy to sit back and listen and then say, okay, I don't see it that way. Can I tell you my side and then I'll listen to yours? Some of you've heard me say this. One of the principles I heard one time when doing marriage counseling or whatever is when two people are arguing, you set up a rule. And the rule is before I can respond to what you're saying, I've got to say back to you what you meant to your satisfaction. Because what do?
Mm-hmm.
We pick the worst possible, they'll say something to me and I'll pick the worst possible thought. I mean, the worst possible response to that. This is what he really means. No, but if you have to say, now, what, let's be clear what you say, and then we can talk. But we, do that.
There's a project going on right now that does that.
Oh,
the one that start, and I can't think of the name of it, but the one that start, where you do the recordings and they're keeping them in the Smithsonian. And now what they're doing is spreading that to where they bring people in that politically are diametrically opposed.
Yeah.
StoryCorps.
Yeah, StoryCorps, but this is it's an offshoot of that. And they
Yes.
bring the two people in and they sit across from one another and they have a moderator. They can't talk anything about the things that they don't agree on.
Yeah.
So they start talking about things that they just finding out
common.
about each other that are common
Having
things to
common.
get them. Yeah.
and
I think.
aren't
this
they
thing is-
picked? Aren't they picked that? I mean, when the two people are picked, they pick people that have some.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
It was 60 Minutes Sunday,
Yes.
I think.
Yeah.
Did it. And these two women one white, one black, one conservative, one liberal, but they were both preachers,
Right.
you know,
And they both had, they begun to realize they both had some of the very same, you know.
yeah.
Mhm. But the one part where you talking about, I will love you and I will keep working at it. In the other group, we were reading John Meacham's book on John Lewis.
Yeah.
And John, I mean, if you ever want an example of a person that did that,
Mhm.
John Lewis is it. I mean, a living Christian, I think, as a role model,
Mhm.
the things I've read about him, he has got to be that you sit there and let somebody beat you up till you're almost dead. And you say, I love you, you know,
Yeah.
that.
One of the
I used to have to every morning in our past presidency, get up and remind myself that God loved that man as much as God loved me.
Yeah.
And that's what I would use to try to get the despising hate out of my system for it, because I just couldn't listen to it. And I would have to constantly remind myself of that.
There's a great story in one of his books. Davis has read it too, and maybe help me get this right. Kurt did too. It was when the Freedom Riders went into South Carolina, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and they knew what they were doing, and they got off the bus, and they literally had the hell beat out of them. And these 2 or 3 guys, particularly, just beat Lewis to a pulp. And the police asked Lewis, "Do you want to press charges?" And he said no.
Mhm.
And years later, this guy who beat him up came and apologized to him and said, "You literally gave my life back to me, because if I had been charged, I'd have gone a whole different way." Yeah, Lewis.
And not exactly the same, but the commission that I guess is the Reconciliation Commission.
Oh, South Africa.
South Africa.
Yeah, Truth and Reconciliation. Yeah.
Truth and Reconciliation. That just moves me to
Yeah.
think about that.
But and Lewis says this somewhere too, I think, or somebody I just read recently. Reconciliation depends on the truth being told. And and that gets back to what Tom was saying, that, you know, if you avoid the truth, you really can't reconcile, because it's still there. It doesn't go away just because you avoid it. Anyway.
You know, when it's you dealing with someone you know, or maybe not interact directly, or you yell at him on the TV screen or something like that. That's, you know, I think you can maybe come around to, yeah, that person is a child of God too.
Yeah.
But when you're confronted with just what seems to be pure evil, like what's going on with Putin or Hitler or any of the world's historical figures who are just nasty, nasty people, you know, I don't know whether I have the faith or the wherewithal to say, yeah, that person is a child of God too. It's kind of like, well, I think it's the spawn of the devil or something, you know. And
or what Peck's book, People of the Lie.
Yeah.
He talks about, some people just flat.
They are just some evil people. Yeah.
Yeah, but those people started out as a child of God. And it gets back to choice. Now, do they continue to make absolutely despicable, horrible, painful choices? Absolutely. And they stretch my Christian care to the extreme edge, if not over. Okay. I mean, no question. Oh, by the way, just an observation, I find it much easier to scream at the television set than I find to scream at people that are real.
It won't scream back.
Yeah, they don't know you're
Exactly.
screaming at them.
That's right. Yeah. I listened, my wife once, years ago, Dallas was playing Miami. Dallas had the game won. And Leon Lett touched the football and allowed the other team to get back into the game, and Dallas lost. I was screaming at the set. I was enraged at the set. And my wife said, you know they can't hear you.
John, I hope you went and I hope you got some counseling about that. That's sad, buddy.
Oh, listen, the list is endless, Kurt. The list is endless. But and you get triggered, Ed. I mean, somebody says something and it goes. I mean, you don't make a theological assessment. You don't go. I'll bet that person is a child. I want to deck that sucker. Okay, and so does Gus apparently. But it has to start, and it gets back to what Kurt and I were talking about earlier. It's work that happens ahead of time that allows you to do it in the present moment. You don't do that kind of work in the present moment. It's a predisposition that you have created in your life that makes that happen. To even have a chance at it. You won't do it all the time. I mean, they're going to torque your jaws.
A predisposition, that's a good way of putting it, John.
Yeah, just
Well, and if you look at John Lewis, he was that way from the
Absolutely.
very
Right.
beginning. When he was preaching to the chickens,
To the chickens.
yeah.
he was that way, so.
I'd love to have seen that altar call, but anyway, that was when he's preaching to chicken. That's the kind of stuff that just makes me have to think.
Well, and Biden got into trouble for reacting the way we would.
Yes,
When
exactly.
His comment about Putin. He
Yeah.
said exactly what every person in the world was thinking.
Yeah.
And yet somehow he shouldn't have said it. He should have been real, that's not something you should say. You should keep this. And I'm thinking, why not say it? He's expressing an opinion and a feeling that we all had.
Okay, here's
too.
well, here's the deal. The hard part for me. When is not saying something like that avoiding the truth?
Yeah.
But on the other hand, when is it that particular truth at that moment is not helpful?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I got no answers to that. I thought I'd be better at it by now, but nah, it ain't happening. It ain't happening. One other question. We got a few minutes. If you are forgiven for your sins, what's the motivation then? What do you do with that? You see, I had my first summer at Duke. We went out in the Duke Endowment Program, which I worked in a church in Concord, North Carolina. Interesting name for a town, because they had Concord, because they had a Klan rally outside of town while I was there that had 5,000 people there, and half the county officials were arrested for being Klansmen. But it was Concord, whatever. Anyway, before we got there, we had ministers boot camp, more or less. And John Rudin, who was the professor of worship at Duke, gave us the layout of worship. Now stay with me here. I do have a point. I know you worry about that. Okay, five letters. Good Methodist, got to have an acronym. ACTED. First part of worship is adoration. Second part is confession. Third part is testimony. Fourth part is exposition. Fifth part is dedication. ACTED. If you've done all those, you have acted. If you have not worshiped. Okay, that's the setup. Here's the theory. Adoration. You start off the service by saying who God is. Call to worship, affirmation of faith, yada, yada, yada. Okay. Then you have confession. That's where you say who you are. But an important part of confession is the words of forgiveness. Because he said, when you have confessed who you are and have been assured of the forgiveness of God, that opens you to hear the testimony. Having heard the testimony, it can be expounded upon, has been expounded upon, then you can dedicate yourself again and go out into the world. But the importance of confession and hearing words of forgiveness is that it motivates us to be different. If I say to you when I have done something, incredibly stupid, gee, I'm sorry. And you say, that's all right, I forgive you. If I turn around and do it tomorrow, I don't think I was really sorry. Either that or I have an incredibly short memory. Okay? So forgiveness is a motivation to be different. It is to change. And I don't know that we're clear enough about that. If you say, well, I can do pretty much what I want to because God will forgive me. Well, yeah, God will forgive you. But as a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure that God's willing to forgive just about everybody. Now, we can get on Hitler and Putin if we want to, but that's another issue, okay? But God forgives, but the question is whether or not the person forgiven makes use of the forgiveness that has been given to them.
Accepted.
Well, it's not just, it's not just accepted, it's incorporated. It becomes part of who we are, what we'd like to become, yada, 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 yada. That's just something that came up to my mind while we were messing around. Anything else that we want to talk about over the next couple of minutes? See if I wrote down anything else. No, that's about it I've got. Anything from anybody? We've got one more week, and I've looked at the list, and it's a bunch of little questions. They're not themed out as much, and we'll just start through, and I probably won't even send them out because it's what do you think the status of the Methodist Church is? That won't take long. Grim, yeah, grim like in the fairy tales. Although there are some real interesting kind of theological, psychological, political, historical implications of all that. We didn't come to this 2 days ago. We've been building up this forever. Yeah. The first time the annual conference had to deal with homosexuality was the annual conference in 1971 at Travis Park United Methodist Church. And I know because I was there, and it was the night that I was supposed to be elected as an elder in the church. And they were going to do that first. And I had a softball game at 8:30, and I had my clothes in the car. And when that session started that night, I knew that ball game was going to be missed because we were going to be there. But it started that night. Wow. I remember it well. So this-
surfaced that night. I don't know that it started then, but yeah.
Well, actually, it had started earlier. We had had a called clergy session of conference at Laurel Heights, like in November, the previous. And Gene, I don't know how it even, I don't even know how it even came up. But Gene Liggett stood up and said, listen, I'm ordained and I'm gay, and everybody here already knew it. I mean, and you could have dropped a pin right then. And oh gee, I can't remember his name now. He was one of the elders in the conference. Walked up the pulpit, he said, I press charges right here.
Oh, no.
And so, no, you're right. It had, you know, it was, yeah. But we can talk more about that. But it's we would like to think it's always simple, and it's never simple. Not stuff like this. Anything else? Because we're nearly there. People are fun. I think there's an important place for this stuff, these kinds of issues. And we can't deal with them in much larger groups than this.
No.
But we need to do it. Because we're all richer for it. Now, do we go away with all our questions answered? Absolutely not. But we know there's a comfort, at least, to knowing we're not the only one in the room that is not totally sure about all this stuff. And so, until next time.